Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight for the FY26 budget presentation. So tonight we are live streaming so people at home can also watch at home if they're not able to make it. So just be sure when we get to the question and answers that you have a mic when you ask those questions. And I'm Julie Orbaugh, and I am part of the communication and public engagement team. So I would like to introduce our council member, Macy Hill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here this evening. If you look around the room, you will see members from different departments of the city. We want to show a video and highlight some of the budget aspects for the 2026 year, but we also want to make sure that we answer your questions. Your input is extremely important to us. I value it. I don't know what to advocate for unless I hear from my constituents, so I appreciate y'all taking the time to come out this evening. I think the video, we just go ahead and cue that up. And again, thank y'all for coming.
Fort Worth reflects smart, strategic growth, benefiting from a fast-growing economy, safe and clean neighborhoods, and a high quality of life for all residents. This year, we reached a historic milestone, 1 million residents strong. With that growth comes opportunity to invest wisely and plan sustainably for the future. For fiscal year 2026, the city is proposing a $3.09 billion budget, including a $1.1 billion general fund, focused on 5 city council priorities: community safety, infrastructure, community investment, economic development, and responsible growth. We are enhancing community safety by adding neighborhood police officers, providing full-year funding for our brand-new EMS service, and launching a new emergency management and communications department. And just as safety is essential, so is the infrastructure that keeps our city moving. We're prioritizing street maintenance and 2 major water treatment facility projects, while strengthening staffing to ensure crucial infrastructure projects are delivered on target. Our neighborhoods remain at the heart of our plan, supported by strengthening the priority repair and neighborhood improvement programs, expanding the mobile toolshed program to assist more homeowners, and adds resources to our animal shelters. By strengthening the places we live, we also lay the foundation for a thriving local economy. To boost economic growth, we're launching a small business development program and upgrading the Will Rogers Complex and Convention Center. We're delivering for today and planning for tomorrow. This is reflected by updating service fees for water, stormwater, solid waste, and environmental protection to improve flood mitigation and ensure sustainable operations. And through PAYO funding, a small but powerful portion of your property tax, we're increasing investment in street and park maintenance. Over the past decade, Fort Worth has kept budget growth in check, thanks to consistent tax rate reductions. The proposed tax rate of 67 cents is a decrease from last year. The typical household with a homestead exemption will pay less in city taxes this year. Out of the 67-cent property tax rate, over 52 cents funds operations and maintenance, and 14 cents goes towards debt. We maintain a fiscally responsible strategy and a strong credit rating, enabling the city to fund upcoming bond programs. The City Council will review the budget throughout August, with a final vote on September 16th.
All right, am I on? Oh, I am. Okay, good evening. My name is Chrissy Simmons, not Jay Chapa. I am filling in for our city manager this evening. He sends his apologies, but he fell ill this afternoon, which is very odd for him. I've actually never really seen him get sick. But he's sorry to miss this evening. So Chrissy Simmons, Chief Transformation Officer with the City of Fort Worth. So my group is the Fort Worth Lab, and among other things, we are the group that produces and manages the city's budget year-round. And so I'm happy to be with you tonight to talk a little bit about fiscal year 26. And I'm going to tag team with Christy Lemon over there, who's our Assistant Director over Budget, so she'll come up in just a bit. So shout out to the Communications and Public Engagement Department for that video. I always like when they produce those. Good summaries of the budget. So you saw some of the spoilers already, but we'll go through a little bit more detail, and happy to, we have a pretty short deck tonight so that we can get to questions as you might have questions. So thank you again for being here. So you heard some of this, but as we began to develop the fiscal year 26 budget, there were a couple of themes that we were keeping in mind. And the first is, we know we're growing. We're growing really rapidly. We hit the milestone of 1 million residents this year, really as of July of 2024, which is a big deal. And with growth comes prosperity, but also complexity and challenges. And so we're trying to manage that in a smart way. And so that's certainly at top of mind when developing the budget. The evolving property tax landscape, for anyone who is kind of paying attention to property taxes, particularly with the Tarrant Appraisal District, you might know that they changed the way that they were appraising residential values. And so we weren't really sure through the budget process how that was going to shake out. So we were running sort of a number of models through the spring and even the summer to make sure we were adequately preparing for that. And so you've seen the result of some of that work with the property tax rate, but we can talk more about that if you're interested. And then, of course, keeping in mind fiscal responsibility. So particularly with the city manager being new, he really wanted to take a fresh look at the department's budgets. And again, with sort of the constrained revenues through the property tax process, we asked departments to tighten their belt annually, but we really asked them again in fiscal year 26. We reduced departments' target budgets that they sort of balance up to. So that was an initial budget cut. There were various other reductions made through the spring and summer. And so there was the fiscal responsibility kind of theme as we developed the budget. Some of the fiscal responsibility, like umbrella, includes looking at fee increases where needed to pay for the cost of service. This includes things like the water rates. There is a new tiered rate structure with water, but also stormwater, capital needs, solid waste, and environmental needs. And so departments do that annually, and there were a number of fee shifts that were in the recommended budget this year that you'll hear a little more about. And then the budget sort of highlighted some of the video highlighted some of the key areas, but certainly we think about core services, right? Like what's the role of government? What is the role of the city? And certainly what comes to mind is public safety and infrastructure, as well as community investment, 3 of the 5 council priorities. And so you saw a number of highlights that the budget includes, and we'll talk a little bit more about those here. So again, last year, for the first time, City Council adopted strategic priorities that are meant to guide all of their work, all the decisions that we're making. The city's making a little bit more of a concerted effort to really tie budgeted resource to outcomes that are part of these priorities, and so we continue to use those as a guiding light. So the first, community safety. So many people, I think this is probably what, between community safety and infrastructure, the council hears about a lot if I were guessing. And so there are a number of budget adds for community safety. Just as a general rule, this isn't really a year that we were adding lots of programs or positions. It was more about sustaining service levels, but there are a couple of adds. One of those is, you may know that the city acquired or assumed the role of ambulance provider through the acquisition of MedStar into the fire department. And so we set up a new special revenue fund for emergency medical services in this budget. And so that was a big addition for fiscal year 26. The next kind of bulleted here, highlight community safety, is the new emergency management and communications department. This was not it's kind of an add and a reorganization. And so really consolidating resources that already existed in the city around emergency management and communications, and also adding to their resources. They're a new department for the first time. And then for police, adding additional neighborhood patrol officers and school resource officers based on requests from some of our ISD partners. On the infrastructure side, this budget prioritizes street maintenance. So we hear about streets all the time in our community survey. It's kind of the number one thing. And so this budget, while it doesn't implement a street maintenance fee, it does begin to study what that fee would look like while also increasing the budget for capital maintenance of streets. So it's kind of a twofold increase in studying what that fee structure might look like in the future. This budget also, just on the capital project delivery side, adds some city personnel so that those projects can be maintained and delivered more efficiently. And then on the water side, there are a number of important capital projects in the fiscal year 26 budget. Community investment, this is what you might think of like neighborhood services and code compliance. And so you'll see some of the ads in that strategic priority. One of those is expanding the priority repair program, which is under the umbrella of the neighborhood services department. It really helps people that own their homes stay in their homes when they have emergent repairs needed. A number of resources as well for code compliance, which is another one of our sort of our heavy hitters when it comes to customer care. In 311, we hear a lot about code compliance. And so this budget expands this pilot program that we were doing in fiscal year 25 called the Mobile Tool Shed program. They've had a really successful pilot, a lot of requests for that program, and so we have added a team and some equipment to expand it. And then the Neighborhood Improvement Program is a popular program that the city offers, and this continues that program at its current fiscal year 25 level, so one neighborhood a year. And then finally, the Far Northwest Library, which is scheduled to open, I think, in late fall of 2026 calendar year. Yes? Oh, it's cut off up there. Sorry. 2026 calendar year, it needs staffing before that. You kind of have to get ready for it to open. And so at the very end of this fiscal year that's coming, we'll be adding staff to that library. So this budget contemplates that as well. Economic development is another one of the City Council's adopted priorities, and so this budget expands the partnership with some of our local chambers in order to set up and deliver a small business development program. It also funds a refresh of the Economic Development Strategic Plan, so the Economic Development Department is actually getting a new director in the coming weeks. Some of you may have seen that in city news. And so we thought that would be a good time to refresh the strategic plan that sort of serves as their guiding light in that department. So this budget will do that as well. There are various culture and tourism or public events investments in this budget as well for Will Rogers and for the Convention Center. And then it also continues investment in the Economic Development Initiatives Fund, which is dedicated funding for us to really focus on incentivizing business to come to Fort Worth. And then responsible growth is one of those priorities that a lot of things can fit within, right? And so I told you, we're trying to keep smart growth in mind. This budget continues advancing the 2050 comprehensive plan, which is really the umbrella plan that all plans should, flow down from, that looks really forward into the future. And so we're in the middle of that right now. Some of you, as engaged residents, may have been involved in some of that engagement. There will be more coming, just as a side note, in the fall. But this budget allows that advancement to happen. We've also added funding for vehicles and equipment. The city has a number of vehicles and equipment that are ready to replace, and so this budget kind of takes a bite out of that. And then we have some workforce initiatives too that this budget helps to fund. We're in the middle of a pay study right now, for instance, for the workforce. It's really comprehensive. So we have a bucket of funding there to implement whatever that pay study says we should do, that the city management and city council agrees on. And then again, I mentioned some fee structure adjustments for a number of departments. All right, so those are just the highlights, which is mostly parroting the video. I fear the video is more interesting than me with all its city B-roll, but that's okay. We'll talk a little bit about property tax, and then I'll turn it over to Christy for a little bit more detail on the budget lines. And don't forget to just write your questions as you have them, and we'll get them addressed. So on the property tax side, the revenue budget flows from taxable values. So you can see the difference in our current year's taxable values versus next year's that we get. The city of Fort Worth actually sits in 4 different appraisal districts. The lion's share of our values comes from Tarrant, but there's also Wise, Parker, and Denton. So in fiscal year 25, our current year, our budget and revenue is based on a taxable value of $121.9 billion, that top row. And then you can see how our values shaped up in July, where the change in taxable value, that's existing growth up on the right, 3.4%, and then new construction growth up 2.5% for a new net taxable value for fiscal year 26 purposes of $129 billion in value. So $8 billion in value. Of course, that doesn't translate to revenue. We have to apply the tax rate, but this is the base we were building from. And just as a note here, when I talked about that we were modeling a number of scenarios, not knowing exactly how our Tarrant Appraisal District values would come in. We were really projecting the change in taxable value to be much lower than 3%. So this was a good news story for us in July when those values actually came in. We thought the growth would be much flatter. So this is the recommended tax rate, 67 cents. This is a quarter-cent reduction from the current year's tax rate. So right now you're operating under a tax rate of 67 and a quarter cents. So the city manager's recommended rate is 67 cents. And on the right-hand side, the way that rate breaks out, 67 cents, the video mentioned 2 and a quarter cent of that goes to our operations and maintenance rate, which is just the piece of the rate that funds the general fund's operations. So a lot of what you think of as core city services, police and fire, TPW, economic development, parks and libraries, those are all general fund services. And then the other portion of the rate goes to debt. So that's paying our debt service. The city manager really wanted to keep our investment in debt, so we didn't want to play with that portion of the rate. We'd like to preserve our future bond capacity, knowing that we have a lot more growing to do, growing and replacing, right, facilities and roads and all kinds of things that come out of a bond program. And then on the operations and maintenance rate, you'll see I think the video calls it the small but mighty portion of the tax rate that says capital. That's PAYGO, pay as you go capital. And that is cash funded capital maintenance. We also really wanted to maintain our investment in cash funded capital maintenance because that reduces our reliance on debt, right? And so that is a portion of the tax rate that's been in place for a little over 10 years now. I think we're going into year 11 maybe, might be 12. Okay, so that's the quick highlight and tax rate primer. I'm going to hand it over to Chrissy for just a few more slides on some of the details by budget and fund type, and then we'll address questions.
All right, good evening. I'm Christy Lemon. I'm an assistant director in the Fort Worth Lab, and I lead the budget team. So I'm going to go through a few more details with you, and then we'll get right to questions. So this table shows our total operating budget for fiscal year 2026. So it's $3.09 billion. That first line is our general fund, and you'll see a little bit of growth there in the general fund. We'll talk about where we spent that growth in just a moment. Probably another big one that you'll notice is the special revenue line. So there's a big increase there, and that is the EMS fund. So the EMS fund is a special revenue fund. This details the general fund. So again, you'll see that about 4% growth in property tax, 4% growth in sales tax as well that we're projecting for next year. And then you'll notice some of the details there on salary and benefits and operations and maintenance. Salary and benefits make the largest portion of our city budget. So these are the drivers for the growth in the general fund. This is basically how we spent that extra bit of revenue that we have in the general fund. So 68% of that growth is for public safety. So as we've already talked about a couple of times, we have $20 million for the EMS subsidy. So $20 million of that total project is coming out of the general fund. Of course, the fund itself is much larger than that, and we have lots of medical billing and revenue coming into the fund, but there is a gap there that we're funding with the general fund. There's $10 million in growth for meet and confer agreements. This is basically salary and benefits for our police officers, and then $5 million for the collective bargaining agreement for the firefighters. So that's where most of our growth went. We also have a little bit of growth in there for our workforce. So we have a pay for performance program, which is how employees receive raises each year. So we have almost 10 million budgeted for that. And then as Christiane mentioned, we budgeted a little bit for early implementation of the pay plan. So if we find that we have certain positions that don't pay quite enough compared to other market, we'll start there and start adjusting pay for employees in that manner. And then we have an additional $4.6 million for PAYGO. So PAYGO is basically capital investment that we do with cash. So instead of using bonds or other debt-funded options, we do a lot of maintenance with cash as well each year. And that's what we call PAYGO. We also have a number of enterprise funds. So the enterprise funds operate more like businesses. So these would be municipal parking, airports, stormwater utility, solid waste, and water and wastewater. So you all are familiar with most, if not all of those. When you're using those services, you're paying a fee for those. So we did see some growth in many of those funds. And as Christiane mentioned, we will have some fee increases in a couple of places. And then these are our special revenue funds. So the Crime Control and Prevention District is funded by a half-cent sales tax. So you can see that. Modest growth there. We're projecting a little bit of growth in sales tax there. And then we have public events, the EMS fund, environmental protection fund, golf, and our community tree planting fund. This is probably what you'll be most interested in. I know it's kind of small, so I'll just outline for you kind of the high points. So this is what an average taxpayer would pay in the proposed budget for FY26. So this is using an average taxable home value. It's assuming that a homestead exemption has already been applied to the value, and then applying the proposed tax rate. So under this scenario, you would actually pay $20 less in property taxes than you paid in fiscal year 25. There are some fee increases in a few areas. So we have an increase in the environmental fee, a little bit of a solid waste fee. It's been, I think, 20 years since the solid waste fee has been increased, so time for a little bit of an increase there. The overall impact is about $3 more per taxpayer per month. So when you reduce the property tax and then increase a couple of fees, you're looking at about a $3 increase per taxpayer. This is a summary of the capital improvement plan. So we do capital planning in 5-year chunks. So each year we'll push out another year, but we always have a 5-year capital improvement plan. So in FY26, you'll see that water has some really big projects. So those will continue into 27 and 28. But kicking off a very big capital plan for water. Public events also has a big plan in FY26. So that's related to the convention center expansion and remodeling. So you'll see that there. So the capital plan for 26 is quite large, and then you'll see it kind of taper off a little bit as we get those really big projects completed. This shows how we're spending our PAYGO dollars. So I know this is kind of small, so I'll just walk you through it. The blue bar is our adopted budget for the current year, and then the green is proposed. What you'll see there on the top bar is Transportation and Public Works is getting some additional funding to work on street maintenance. So as Christiane mentioned, that's one of the biggest issues we hear from residents, and so there's some additional money that we put toward street maintenance there. All the other funds grew at approximately the same rate. The Park and Recreation Department did get a little bit more capital funding as well in the plan this year. So this kind of summarizes the entire thing. So you'll see the operating budget is growing to $3.1 billion. And then our capital plan, $1.3 billion. So the total overall budget for FY26 as proposed is almost $4.5 billion. So I know that you probably have friends or neighbors that weren't able to be here tonight, so I just want to mention that we do have more meetings coming up. Anyone can watch them live, send in a question, and we'll answer it live. So if you have somebody who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't, encourage them to participate in an upcoming meeting. And there's also an opportunity to provide comments on our website, so all that info is here. And then, of course, we're leading to the budget hearings and budget adoption on September 16th. So that's where we're headed. So just a few weeks away. And with that, I think we can turn it over for questions.
All right, any questions? Interests? Feedback? I think we had some questions that came in via, is she out there? Like beforehand via email or something, but questions live in the room at this point? Okay. Yes, hi. Oh, here's the mic. I think you're supposed to.
Do you have a general idea of the amount of federal funds and grants, whatever, that the city gets in a year?
Yes, and I'm going to let Dana help me. So I think our annual year-over-year sort of operating amount of grants was 45 million-ish. 40.6, 41 million. And then the capital amount that's not necessarily repeating was bigger. Oh, she has a microphone. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So when we briefed the City Council in June and then again in early August, we were using a number for all of our multi-year grants that was around 277 million. We recently had our finance department update that, and that number came down to about 260 million because some of the grants from earlier this year had been closed out. But that's grants for all of our capital projects, so that includes airports, streets and bridges, as well as operating grants that affect public safety, civil rights, as well as our community development grants. But in terms of the annual grants, it's about 40.6 million. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
We do have two that came in through email. Okay. So the first one is, would you please clarify how the 87% increase in the city manager's budget will be used? Also, the non-departmental budget more than doubles from approximately 42 million to 85 million. Please provide more specific information about how these increases in funding in these departments will be used. Thank you.
Good question from someone out there in the ether. So those are reorganizations, not necessarily additions. So I'll take the second one first, and then you can remind me about the city manager's budget. The non-departmental department is a weird name, is a place that we put budget expenditures that don't necessarily tie to one specific department. The 87 or whatever percent increase for non-departmental, the more than doubling from 40 something to 80 something million is only as a result of moving the budget for economic development incentives out of the economic development budget and into the non-departmental budget. That is just a city manager's preference because it really inflates the economic development budget to have it in there. So when they're forecasting, they're always looking at like they look like they're a top 5 or 7 department when really the budget for the incentives that we pay out was in their budget. So we just stripped it out, put it in non-departmental, and we'll pay it from there. So that's the reason for that one. And then how about the city manager's budget? Those were also reorganizations, but Christy will tell you the detail.
Yeah, so in the city manager's budget, you did see some changes there. That's because we reorganized a team called the Long Range Planning Team. So they have been part of the Fort Worth Lab department, and they're being moved to the city manager's office. So all existing resources, no new dollars, just a reorganization. And then the other piece of that is we had the team that works with our homeless population. They had some contracts and other dollars in the neighborhood services department, and we moved those to the city manager's office where they're currently being managed. So it's, again, just realigning dollars, but no new dollars there either.
Okay, and then we have one more question that we got through email. The recommended budget aligns with the City Council's strategic priorities: economic development, community investment, community safety, infrastructure, and responsible growth. If that's the case, why are you cutting the economic development budget line by 80%?
Pop quiz, refer to my previous answer. Yes. Do you remember? Yes. Yes. So So moving the economic development incentive agreements out of economic development and into non-departmental is responsible for that reduction. And actually, the economic development department gained a few resources with the launch of the small business development program, and so it's kind of an offset there. Yeah, good question. I like that people are looking at the detail. That's great.
Okay, so that's all we have on email and text so far.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, here. Oh.
You mentioned that there was going to be a change in the NPOs and the SROs. Can you just go into a little more detail about that?
Yes. Come on up, Interim Chief Robert Aldridge. So the police department did a beat study, and that's where the NPOs are coming from. In that beat study, they created 12 additional beats. There are 8 NPOs that will cover those 12 based on the way that they're aligned. So that's thing 1, and he can tell you more smart things.
No, you pretty much covered it all. So you listen to me enough that you understand what it is. So yes, we did a beat realignment. Prior to the beat realignment, we had 90 beats. Now we have 112. We had 94 MPOs. So with the addition of the 8 MPOs, that brings every beat will have an MPO. Up to that point, we didn't have an MPO for every beat. So it kind of equalizes that. And then Fort Worth ISD, just to get into compliance with state law to have school resource officers in elementary schools, we're working towards that plan. So that's where those 2 school resource officers are going.
Can you comment about just overall police? Can you comment just, I know it's not exactly part of the budget, but can you comment on overall police recruiting, how you're doing on building resources and stuff? Because we just don't see a lot of police coverage in our area. So
sure. How much time you got? So our recruiting efforts are actually really pretty good. So we just did a posting for our openings. Normally we usually get about 1,000 applicants. Now we have about 1,800. We're scheduled to be fully staffed by September of 2026. So we have a lateral entry officer program, which are officers that are certified already, and they go through an abbreviated academy. But we have an academy class starting, they're in right now. We had a lateral class start today, I believe. And then we have other classes that are going to be starting at the end of the year. So our goal to hit fully staffed by September 2026 is right on target. And as you see some of these classes roll out, you're going to see the staffing improve in patrol. So whenever we did the beat realignment study, what we did was we froze transfers out of patrol for 4 months. And the purpose of that is to get our beats, to make sure that we aligned our beats the way they're supposed to. We have the number of officers that we need, but it's also to allow the staffing to increase because we have vacancies in patrol right now. Well, we have 2 classes that are out there right now. We have about 83 officers that are training that aren't basically by themselves. They're training with somebody to learn the job, but as soon as they get cut loose, they will be cut loose in patrol, and by that time, patrol will be fully staffed by the end of the year. So you're probably going to see a lot more officers out rolling around. Yes.
Yes, question up top.
Okay.
Does the city have a rainy day fund? Yeah. Yes. So the city.
How much is that?
So it depends on which fund. So Reggie, you can throw a tomato at me if I'm wrong. So the main city fund, the general fund, has a reserve requirement of 2 months operating expenditures, so 16.67% of the next year's budget's operating reserves. The goal is to get that to 25%. So in our year-end closing activities, we're going to recommend, actually we just recommended to council last week to maintain our 22% reserve level. So that's where we sit right now. Now, what does 22% actually mean? 232 million or something. Yeah. And then other funds have different reserve requirements too. So some of the special revenue funds might be different. Our internal service funds are different. But as far as the city's main operating fund, it's 16.67% is a requirement. And we're above that at 22% now. That help? Okay. Yes. Oh, here comes the mic.
Thanks. Going back to the gentleman's question about the federal government's contributions to our budget, have there been any conversations, post the DEI vote in the city council and the pressure from the federal government around us abiding by what they want in order to receive that money, to how to become less dependent? Like, are we factoring that into how we're thinking about the budget, how to become less dependent on federal dollars to maintain our city's agency and control?
Oh, here comes Dana.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of thoughts. One is we did, and I need the budget folks to correct me, but I believe we did fund some of our emergency management positions thank you, William, where we had been relying on federal grant dollars for our emergency management staff. They had been grant funded for many years. So we were able to, for this first year, for the first time, shift a few positions over from being grant funded to being funded out of the general fund. So we began that shift this year for the first time. We got the announcement from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, that our FY26 allocation for our community development federal funds, that's CDBG, HOME, HOPWA, and ESG, that those dollars for FY26 are expected to be a little bit higher than our FY25 dollars. So we did not make any did not use any of the general fund this year to try to account for those community development dollars. Similarly, HUD has also so far told us that our civil rights dollars for fair housing, fair employment, that those are expected to remain as well. So we've not tried to transition those staff over yet either. But those are certainly things that we're keeping an eye on as Congress is going to be talking about the budget to see what kinds of changes we might need to make. So certainly as we go into conversations this winter for the FY27 budget, obviously as we see what happens with the federal government and the conversations about budget, we'll have to begin discussing that and to see what does that mean for us, what kinds of contingencies, plans do we have to have in place. Similarly, though, the other thing that's happening that will actually limit our options to do that is activities at the state level to limit our ability to use revenue that supports our general fund, particularly property tax revenue, to be able to pay for additional costs that we would normally cover with federal funds. So, for example, we rely on growth in new development, right? Property tax growth, as well as growth in the value of properties to help pay for the growth in services that our population growth demands. And so there's a bill that we expect to pass in this special legislative session that would limit our ability to increase that growth for next year's budget. And so that's going to hamper our ability to transition those federal fund, the services that those federal funds were covering to the general fund. So it reduces that amount. And so that's unfortunately weighing or pushing against our ability to begin to move that over. So that's something that we expect that bill to pass at the state level, which counters our ability to react to what's happening at the federal level. Yeah.
Is that an across-the-board reduction, or is that just in specific programs that you're speaking of?
You finished. Okay.
Yeah, Christiane can answer as well. But the state legislative change, I believe, and you can correct me, but I believe would affect all municipalities across the state of Texas. So in terms of their ability for
Specific programs within the city's budget that you were mentioning, is that the state, what you represented from the state, is that across the board reductions, or is that a specific targeted specific?
So the bill that I was discussing at the state level that would reduce our ability to collect property tax revenue affects all cities and would affect our revenue for FY27. The city council, city staff advising, and then the city council would make the decision on what programs we would then be able to fund with that reduced revenue. So we would have to adjust our budget for FY27 accordingly and decide, what programs do we maybe need to trim back because our revenue is declining perhaps from what we would have anticipated from FY26.
Okay, so it could be a decline in every certain percentage or
Certainly, yeah, we could look at something across the board. More likely, to the point made earlier, we'll look at the city council's strategic priorities and try to align with those priorities. Yeah.
Yeah, question on the flip that happened between the property tax and the fee structure. Is there any detail you can provide to ensure that the fee structure isn't impacting our lower income families? I've always understood that a property tax is a naturally progressive tax versus when you do a flat fee structure, it can actually be regressive and hurt those families. So just curious what analysis or structure was put in place to ensure that we're not hitting them even harder during this difficult economic time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can speak sort of high level at strategy, and then I'm happy to hear from any of our maybe demand-based departments who look at those things. So this slide that Christy showed is based on typical usage. So some of it's, again, demand-based. But what I'll say about the offset is that part of the reason that even among all these legislative changes that we still recommended the 1/4 cent reduction is to help offset the fee structure changes that we knew needed to happen. So for example, Christy mentioned solid waste and that it's been like 20 or 30 years since we changed that fee. For long-term sustainability of that fund and current service levels, we knew we needed a fee change, but we didn't want to raise the property tax rate or leave it when our values grew, leave it flat, and then tack on a bunch of fees. So that offset was very intentional. But as far as like the individual departments and the way that they predict and plan the demand and the fee structure, I'm happy to turn over the mic for water or stormwater or anybody.
Yeah, and let me jump in on one thing real quickly. I'll turn over to Jennifer. The other piece, at least with regard to our elderly low-income residents, they do have this 65 and older tax freeze. So at least that benefits them, that their property taxes don't increase after the age of 65. But that's only for seniors. So, but that doesn't impact the lower, I'm asking, I guess, more specifically on the fee structure, what we're doing to those families. Since they get those protections on the property tax side, but you're essentially offsetting those savings by driving it with the fee increases. That's correct.
So Jennifer Dyke, Assistant Director of the Stormwater Program. For the Stormwater Program, the fees are based off the amount of impervious hard surface on each property. So for single-family residential properties, we actually have 4 tiers. So the smallest sized residents in Tier 1, they would pay 18 cents more a month. So we intentionally kept our rate increase proposal very small, because of the impact on all ratepayers, not just low income, but also ones with a lot of impervious surface. We know that that's going to be hard on them, that 5%. And so that's why we were trying to keep it as small as possible, but still give us the ability to tackle those flood mitigation needs across the city.
Hi, I'm Valerie Washington, and I can talk a little about the solid waste and environmental fees. So on the solid waste side, those are the fees that are charged for collecting residential garbage, and that really is just based on the cost of service, kind of the cost of actually picking up that garbage service. And our garbage service is a diversion-based system, so we try to do everything we can to keep things out of the landfill. So we offer recycling, we offer bulk pickups, and those things cost money. And the department has really worked hard to streamline that cost of service, and it really is covering the cost of doing business and providing that service to residents. On the environmental side, it's a 75-cent fee increase this year. And there were a lot of internal deliberations as the staff looked at setting that fee. When you looked at their capital needs and some of the other items, we really could have looked at setting it a little higher, but really decided that 75 cents, while it is not ideal, would really be a fair way to look at it. The department's able to cover their cost. It covers future environmental remediations. But I can tell you a lot of due diligence goes into setting the rates and fees for both of those funds.
I'll just say very quickly on the water side, you see there's really no rate increase for the average customer on the water side. Very, very small rate increase on the wastewater side. And when we look at our rates, we look at affordability. That's what we consider to be essential water use, indoor water use, or some discretionary use. And we track that every year. And I will tell you for the last 8 years, our affordability index has dropped. So that's actually positive. So we've gone from like a 1.41%. That's the water and sewer rate divided by the median income. And it's dropped down to 1.14, I think it is right now. So that's something we track every year. And affordability is something that is a priority to us.
Good questions. Anybody else? Okay. He's like, call it. Okay. All right. Well, oh,
I thought you said somebody had one.
oh, yep. There's another one. See?
Oh, okay.
No, you're good.
As part of the budget that will get approved, is it simply the financials that will get approved, or is it also some of the strategic goals that were included as part of this budget package?
it's the budget itself. So the strategic priorities are adopted via resolution and have been adopted. Council revisits those every 2 years. They actually haven't done that yet because they're so new, and so as for the priorities are so new. But the action on the 16th is the tax rate and the budget. Mm-hmm.
What steps is the city taking to look at the department, the personnel, the expenses, to trim off some areas that we might not need certain personnel or certain expenses, to kind of trim off that to lower the budget?
Yeah, so this year we used a target-based budgeting approach. So we, at the very beginning of the budget season, we trimmed 1% from every department's budget. So we gave them a target; they had to meet that target, and they were able to decide where they wanted to trim. So they would work, of course, with their assistant city manager to determine like what priorities were. So we made those initial cuts, and that was $7 million that we saved through that strategy. And then the second strategy that we used, we asked departments to submit reduction packages. So it's kind of a technical term that we use, but they submit some information about what they would propose to reduce if we didn't have revenue to cover. So they submitted a whole bunch of those, and then we were able to take a number of them. There were some things, many of you may know that we moved to a new building. Most of our city staff is concentrated now in a new city hall building. And so there were some costs related to like mileage of driving around because we had people in all different spaces. We had more printers in our old space because it was configured differently. So we were actually able to reduce another $4 million. A lot of it with things like that, things that no one will miss. So those were really good, just responsible budgeting strategies that we used this year. Sure.
My question is along the same lines. In your salaries budgets, do you have bonuses, and how much is that?
We don't have bonuses. All employee raises, except for police and firefighters who have contracts, but our general employee raises are based on a pay-for-performance program. So at the beginning of the year, employees are given goals, and if they meet those goals, then they'll be considered for a performance raise. But there are no bonuses. Anything else? All right. Well, we will hang around for a few minutes. If you have a secret question that you want to ask, we'll be up front. But thanks everyone for participation. This was a great meeting. We appreciate you.